I just went over to borrow sugar from my neighbor, but she didn't let me leave alone. One glance, one moment, and suddenly I couldn't stop thinking about her. She was older, confident, and something about her pulled me in. I didn't know if it was curiosity, attraction, or something I wasn't ready to name. I went over to borrow sugar from my neighbor, or at least that was the excuse I told myself. The knock on her door felt louder than it should have, echoing in the narrow hallway of the apartment building. When she opened, I froze for a fraction too long. Her presence was immediate, grounding, almost electric. She was taller than I expected, the kind of woman who carried herself with quiet authority, mid-40s but effortlessly graceful, the corners of her eyes hinting at a life fully lived. "Hey," she said, and smiled, but there was something behind it, a trace of amusement, maybe curiosity. Her voice wasn't loud or flashy, but it lingered in the air longer than necessary. Hi," I stammered, realizing my words had nothing to do with sugar anymore. I held the little bag in my hand like it might give me courage, but my fingers kept brushing against the paper edges. Nervous, restless. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner, warm and lived in. I noticed a stack of books by the window, a mug half full of tea left cooling on the counter, and the faint hum of music that didn't quite match the brightness of the afternoon. Every detail seemed to anchor me to the moment, but also pull me closer. She leaned against the counter, one hand on her hip, casual but deliberate. I caught her glance lingering on me, just long enough to feel it, too short to understand it. She moved as if she owned the space, yet offered it to me quietly, in a way I didn't know how to interpret. "I made cookies yesterday," she said suddenly, breaking the silence, but didn't move to offer any. I noticed the faint crease between her brows, the way her lips twitched before she smiled again, like she was holding something back. I realized I could watch her all day and still miss half of what she said. There was a pause just long enough for me to feel a little foolish. Cleared my throat. "Thanks for, the sugar." My words felt clumsy in comparison to her effortless calm. "You don't have to go yet," she said, almost as if noticing my hesitation, though I hadn't intended to leave immediately. Her tone was casual, but the way her eyes met mine made my chest tighten. It wasn't a question. It was a gentle tug I didn't know how to resist. I caught myself watching her hands as she reached for a jar of flour, the subtle way her fingers brushed the edge of the countertop. Every small gesture seemed deliberate, but not showy, like she moved through her life with a rhythm I wasn't used to. A laugh escaped her. Soft, unassuming, but something about it brushed against my nerves in a way that made me both aware and dizzy. I shifted on my feet, realizing that I had forgotten why I even came here. Sugar, maybe, but also this, whatever this was. When I finally stepped toward the door, she didn't move to stop me, but her presence in the room felt heavier, warmer, and harder to leave than the physical air around us. I took a breath, stepped out, and kept glancing back. She was watching me, a quiet question in her eyes, unspoken. That night, I kept replaying her voice in my head, like I missed something, or maybe wanted something. I didn't plan on going back so soon, but there I was again, knocking lightly on her door. The afternoon sunlight spilled through the hallway window, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her apartment. She opened before I could even decide if I should really step inside. "Back so soon?" she asked, tilting her head, eyes narrowing just a fraction, as if weighing me. I swallowed, caught somewhere between embarrassment and anticipation. I forgot something," I mumbled, hoping it sounded casual. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing, letting me step in. The room smelled faintly of vanilla this time, the cookies from the other day still leaving their ghost scent in the air. She moved around the kitchen with quiet precision, washing a dish, stacking a pan, wiping her hands on a towel. I watched the way her fingers lingered over the countertop, just brushing it, almost absent-mindedly. "Here," she said suddenly, holding out a mug of tea. Her hand didn't shake, but I noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the slight pause before she offered it. She didn't look at me while handing it over, eyes focused on the window. Something was weighing on her, unspoken but undeniable. I accepted the tea, warmed by both the mug and the gesture. "Thanks," I said softly. She let out a small laugh, almost distracted, brushing her hair behind her ear. It wasn't loud, not for attention, but it caught me in a way I didn't expect. I wanted to ask her something, anything, but the words didn't form. Instead, I just watched, silent, noticing the faint shadows under her eyes, the tired set of her jaw. We moved around the kitchen in an easy, quiet rhythm, yet there was a friction beneath it. I washed a plate she handed me, my hands lingering too long in hers. She noticed and didn't comment, only shifted slightly, pulling away just enough to remind me of the distance she carefully maintained. And yet, there were moments she let slip, a hand brushing mine while passing, the way her eyes softened when she thought I wasn't looking, a half-smile that didn't quite reach the edges of her mouth. Every little gesture made my chest tighten. I wanted to ask her if she was okay, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I asked her about the tea, about the cookie recipe, anything to stay here in this space between us without breaking the invisible rules. She looked at me then, finally, a long, deliberate gaze that felt heavier than the air in the room, like she wanted to say something, but didn't, and that silence felt louder than words. I realized she was as guarded as ever, but also human, vulnerable in small, almost imperceptible ways. And I, too, was caught in a quiet gravity I couldn't escape. When I finally left, I lingered in the doorway longer than necessary, our eyes meeting in a silent understanding neither of us would voice. Outside, the hall felt too bright, too loud, too exposed compared to the intimacy of her apartment. And I knew I'd return, again and again, drawn by the subtle pull of something neither of us fully admitted. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but didn't, and that silence felt louder than words. It was late when I found myself standing outside her door again. Rain had begun to fall, tapping rhythmically against the window, a dull, persistent drum that matched the nervous thrum in my chest. She opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been expecting me, though I'd told myself I'd come only for a forgotten book I had left behind. "You're drenched," she said, a quiet observation that carried more than concern. I shrugged, shivering slightly, aware of the heat of her apartment contrasting with the cold drizzle outside. I didn't want to bother you," I said, but she waved me in with a small, almost imperceptible gesture. Inside, the warmth wrapped around me like a soft, heavy blanket. She moved past me, stacking papers on her desk with the same careful precision I had come to notice. The light from her desk lamp painted her face in a soft amber glow, highlighting lines I hadn't seen before, the evidence of a life fully lived and perhaps a little lonely. I lingered near the doorway, hands shoved in my jacket pockets, not wanting to intrude but unable to leave. Her glance flicked to me briefly, then returned to the papers. There was a hesitation in her movements, a momentary falter as if she had considered saying something but didn't. I found your book," I said finally, holding it up. She looked at it, eyes catching mine for just a beat longer than necessary. "Thanks," she replied, her voice soft, almost distracted. And then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Do you want to sit?" I nodded, unsure if she meant the couch or if this was some unspoken test I wasn't aware of. We settled across from each other, the storm outside a steady reminder of our isolation. The space between us felt charged, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of her perfume, yet distant enough to respect the invisible boundary she maintained. A sudden buzz from her phone broke the quiet. She glanced at it, and I noticed a small crease in her brow as she read a message, a flash of tension that seemed out of place in the calm of her apartment. I said nothing, just waited, heart racing. When she looked up, the tension had softened, but there was a fragility there I hadn't seen before. I found myself inching slightly closer, drawn by the vulnerability she couldn't voice. My hand rose almost on instinct, halfway to brush hers, to offer something tangible in the quiet storm of emotion. But she caught it with her eyes, a mixture of warning and understanding. "You should go now," she said, gentle but firm. a hand subtly resting on the edge of the couch. I obeyed, though only my body left the room. My mind stayed behind, tangled in the sound of the rain, the soft hum of the lamp, and the fleeting warmth of her presence. My chest ached with restraint, the nearness of her so tantalizingly close it hurt. Outside, the rain soaked my jacket, but I barely noticed. I kept thinking about that half-touch, that almost moment. My hand was halfway to hers when she said, "You should go now." And I did. But only my body left that room. That I didn't mean to stay so late. But the room felt smaller without me in it, and yet somehow emptier when I was gone. She had been sitting at her desk, sorting papers, when I came back from the kitchen with a glass of water. I didn't even think. I just wanted to be near her, to feel the gravity she always seemed to carry. She didn't look up immediately, her fingers tapping lightly on the glass. The room smelled faintly of lavender and paper, and the rain had slowed to a soft drizzle. I shifted, clearing my throat, hoping my presence wouldn't feel like an intrusion. Finally, she spoke. "Why do you keep coming back?" Her voice was soft, but not accusatory. Curious, hesitant. I froze. Part of me wanted to tell her, wanted to confess that I wasn't sure why I came, that I hadn't just wanted sugar or a book or anything practical, that I came for her. But I didn't. The words lodged somewhere in my chest. I don't know," I said finally. Too honest, too vague. Her eyes met mine then, long, deliberate, and I saw something flicker there. Confusion, concern, maybe even fear. She leaned back, crossing her arms, but her shoulders were loose, unguarded just enough to betray her inner tension. "It's unusual," she murmured. "People don't usually do this." "I know," I said softly. My eyes drifted to her hands, resting on the desk. The skin was pale, the nails neatly trimmed. She twirled a pen absent-mindedly, a small, almost imperceptible tremor in her fingers. I realized she was tired, not just physically but emotionally. A weight I couldn't touch, only sense. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It vibrated with everything unsaid. The hesitation, the longing, the fragile electricity that hung between us like charged air before a storm. I wanted to bridge it, to say the thing that hovered just out of reach. But I couldn't. I could only watch. She seemed to shrink and expand at once, a paradox of strength and vulnerability that made my chest ache. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter this time, more to herself than to me. "What are we doing?" The words landed with a weight I wasn't prepared for. What were we doing? There was no guidebook for this, no explanation for the magnetic pull, the fleeting touches, the near confessions that left my heart racing. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words failed. Instead, I stepped closer, just enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, to occupy the same space without crossing the invisible line. She didn't say anything, just looked at me, like she was already mourning something we never even had. And in that look, I felt it all. The tension, the fear, the desire, the confusion. We were both on the edge of something, suspended in a moment that refused definition, and yet demanded feeling. I left that night with her eyes burning into my back, the question echoing in my chest. What are we doing? And I didn't know if I was terrified, thrilled, or both. That I didn't expect her to call me that evening. The phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I answered, her voice came soft, almost hesitant. "Can you come by? I found something." I arrived to find her standing in the living room, holding an old photo in her hands. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets outside glistening under the streetlights. She didn't speak immediately, just traced the edges of the picture with her fingers, her jaw tight, eyes distant. "Who is it?" I asked gently, not wanting to disturb whatever memory she was holding. She looked up then, meeting my gaze, and for a fraction of a second, she looked smaller, younger, fragile in a way I hadn't seen before. "It's someone I lost," she said quietly. "A long time ago." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle between us. There was no melodrama in her tone, no theatrical heartbreak, just honest, quiet grief. And something inside me stirred, a mix of empathy, admiration, and unease. She shifted the photo toward me, hesitant, almost testing whether I could handle the intimacy of the memory. I saw a younger version of her, smiling in a way that seemed impossible to reconcile with the woman in front of me. My throat tightened. I didn't allow myself to remember her like this for years, she whispered. Until now. I wanted to say something comforting, but the words felt clumsy, heavy. Instead, I just nodded, leaning against the doorway, feeling the room's warmth and the soft weight of her presence. For a moment, we simply looked at the photo together, silence wrapping around us like a blanket. I noticed the subtle tremble in her hands, the way her lips pressed together, the flicker of memory in her eyes. She was strong, confident, yet still capable of being undone by something so simple, so human. Then she sighed, a long, slow exhale that seemed to release years of unspoken tension. I haven't allowed anyone to see this. Not really. Her eyes met mine, steady but vulnerable. There was a flicker of trust there, tentative, fragile, but unmistakable. And for a moment, I understood why I had been drawn here so many times, why I couldn't stop thinking about her. She took a breath like she hadn't allowed herself to in years, I thought, watching her lower the photo gently to the table. And for the first time, she looked at me without fear. I realized then that our connection had shifted, imperceptibly but irrevocably. The quiet intimacy of shared grief, the vulnerability she allowed in my presence, had altered the rhythm between us. Something that had been tentative, unspoken, and suspended in tension now felt real, dangerous in its honesty, but irresistibly human. I didn't know where this would lead, only that the ground had shifted beneath us, and I had nowhere else to stand but here, with her. I found myself back at her apartment again, though I hadn't planned to come. The city outside was quiet, the hum of streetlights blending with the faint scent of rain lingering in the air. She was sitting on the couch, a blanket draped loosely over her shoulders, reading something on her phone. The soft glow illuminated her face, showing lines I'd come to recognize, traces of laughter, worry, and a life fully lived. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes softened, but there was still a hesitation there, a careful distance that made my chest tighten. I didn't sit immediately. I just stood, feeling the weight of everything between us. "You're here again," she said softly, though it wasn't a question. "I wanted to see you," I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. She didn't respond right away, just shifted slightly, letting me in without speaking. I moved toward her, settling in the space beside her rather than across. The warmth of her presence wrapped around me, and I realized that the boundaries we'd held so carefully were dissolving. Gently, quietly, without fanfare. We didn't speak for a long while. I watched her hands fold in her lap, noticed the way her fingers brushed against the fabric of the blanket absent-mindedly. Every small gesture seemed deliberate yet effortless, a rhythm I'd learned to read without instruction. At some point, our knees brushed. I felt it, and so did she, though neither of us reacted immediately. The subtle contact carried the weight of all our unspoken words, all the hesitation, all the longing. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance fully, but I didn't need to. She leaned slightly toward me, just enough, and it felt like permission. Quiet, unspoken, and perfect. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "Neither do I said, but the words didn't carry uncertainty. They were acknowledgement, recognition, and agreement all at once. Her hand moved slightly, brushing mine, and I let mine rest there. Not a declaration, not a promise, just a shared warmth in the quiet room. The moment stretched, fragile and perfect. She didn't speak again, but she didn't pull away. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, there was no guard, no hesitation, no fear, just presence. Just us in a space that felt entirely ours. I realized then that love didn't have to be shouted. It didn't have to be declared with grand gestures or confessions. Sometimes it was this: a hand touch, a shared silence, a gentle acceptance of the other person's presence. She didn't say she loved me, but she let her guard down, and that was louder than any I love you, ever could be. And in that quiet collapse, I understood something fundamental. What we had wasn't fleeting, wasn't impulsive, wasn't superficial. It was earned. It was real. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to step back, to hold myself at a distance. I was exactly where I needed to be. It's been weeks since that night. Yet I still find myself replaying every small detail. The way her fingers brushed mine, the faint curve of her smile, the warmth that filled the spaces between us without a single word spoken. Life has moved on around us, but somehow, we exist in a quiet orbit, tethered by moments too subtle to name but too powerful to forget. I catch myself smiling at the memory of her laugh, the one that had once brushed against my nerves and left me unsettled in the best way. Even now, I can hear the soft cadence of her voice, the way she said my name like it was a question and an answer all at once. We don't rush things anymore. There's no grand declarations, no dramatic gestures, no attempts to force the feeling into words. Simpler than that, more honest. We sit together, make tea, watch the rain slide down the windows. Sometimes we speak, sometimes we don't. But the silence isn't empty. It's a language of its own. She's changed, too. I see it in the way she lets herself rest when she's tired, how she laughs freely at small jokes, how her eyes soften in ways I didn't think I'd ever be allowed to witness. And I've changed, more patient, more aware of the weight of touch, the value of presence, the fragility and strength that coexist in a person. I think about what drew me to her in the first place, the subtle electricity, the confident grace, the way she carried herself like a storm held in check. I realize now that what I loved wasn't just her. It was the space she allowed me to enter, the trust she quietly offered, the slow unraveling of walls I hadn't even known were there. We've learned, in our own unspoken way, that closeness doesn't always need words. That love isn't a lightning strike or a fireworks display. Sometimes, it's a quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence, the brush of a hand, a shared glance that says, without speaking, I see you, and I'll stay. I didn't just fall for an older woman. I fell into something rare, something true. And I hope, if you're listening, you find something like that too. Something that makes ordinary moments feel extraordinary, that lingers in memory long after the world moves on, that leaves you both shaken and calm at the same time. And maybe that's what love is, not perfection, not declarations, not certainty. Just presence, trust, and the quiet, steady knowing that some connections are too profound to force, too real to ignore. If the story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?